Let's start with the Sama Bajau. The Sama Bajau are a remarkable sea nomadic people. They're found from the southern Philippines all the way along the Sulu archipelago to Sabah and down, and then also into Sulawesi. They have been migrating southwards for at least 500 years, and they have moved, and they are living on Roti. There are settlements on Roti, and the settlements on Roti are growing. There are settlements in the Bay of Kupang. The Bajau are a noticeable group. So what I did some years ago, before I'd ever really worked with the Bajau, was to use the historical sources that I found in the Dutch archives. And they're interesting. I wrote an article on the southern migration of the Bajau. And I didn't trace all the Bajau migrations, just the ones that carried them all the way down from Sulawesi, through Flores in eastern Indonesia, Alor, and then on down. But what I found in the archives, and quite by accident, and just reading the archives, I found what was the first mentions of the Bajau coming down towards into eastern, say Nusa Tenggara Timor. And there is a report in the 1750s of this, and for the Dutch who reported it, it was unusual and extraordinary. You had a migration of whole families on boats coming down first to Alor, and then they were on Roti. Well, what they were doing is searching for tripang, the sea cucumber, the bêche de mer. And you could see that's what they were doing. The Dutch were describing that, for the Dutch officials in the company, this is all strange. Families of boat people coming down, gathering sea cucumbers, or at least searching for the best grounds of sea cucumbers. From that, you could extrapolate that by 1750, they had reached what at that time was called Sahul, the islands, especially the Ashmore Reef, which now is Australian territory, and was then and is now a major source of tripang. But almost certainly, at least in my opinion, and I've made the argument, the Bajau Laut were the first of the Indonesians who discovered Australia. And they discovered extraordinarily rich sources of tripang, and they were acting only on behalf of the Macassans, the Bugis, and they would pioneer they would identify the areas. They were the first to identify the areas, and then the Macassaries would come in much larger boats with much larger crews, and this in the Australian literature is very, very prominent because there are so many memories of these Macussan fishermen among the Aboriginal populations of the north coast of Australia. So it is, my studies, my Indonesian studies merged with Australian studies. And it's an ongoing subject of investigation. But in addition to that, Australia has signed a memorandum of understanding allowing, it's a badly worded, in fact, it's absurdly worded access statement that allows traditional fishers to fish on the reefs between Australia and between Indonesia and Australia, all of which have their Australian, they have English names, but they're also all identified in Indonesian terms as well. They are perfect. From an Indonesian point of view, they're Indonesian islands. From the Australian legal point of view, they are Australian territory. But under this memorandum of understanding from the 70s, they are allowed under certain rules to gather sea products, and that's mainly the sea cucumber, what's called tripang. But they're able to gather some other things as well. And so this has always been a problem because it depends on the kind of boat used and following the access rules, and these have changed over time. So you could say that the Australian government feels it has a continuing problem dealing with all of those island or reefs that form the territory of the MOU, or in Australian terms, there is a significant area between Australia and Indonesia called the MOU-box. And there are rules for accessing it, and there are rules, and then they can be broken. And Australia has continually had problems with these Indonesian fishermen. And again, in my position in the research school, I have been called on frequently to go up just as far as Darwin to interview crews of boats that have detained and explained where they're from, what they're doing, trying to make an argument. I've succeeded only once in a court case, getting the Bajau crew released and allowed to sail back to Indonesia without penalty. Once out of many other attempts. So I don't have a good record. But I've done all sorts of other things, including in interviewing fishermen who are detained in Darwin and whatnot, and written about it. So I've written a substantial body of work. I would say at least a half dozen articles on the Bajau Laut and other fishermen, but it's mainly Bajau who have been detained in excess. I have also been given a project by the Department of Environment, Australian Department of Environment, to go up to Roti to work in those areas from which the fishermen come to develop alternate livelihoods. And this has been a project I've done with one of my Rotanese students in establishing seaweed cultivation. So I've been involved in seaweed projects, but the Bajau aren't interested in cultivating seaweed. I can tell you that. It won't. It's not what they're doing. Also, and probably one of the most interesting times I've ever had is one of the reefs, Scott Reef, off the coast of the Kimberleys in Australia, has, and this is talking, this is already 20 years ago, has something in the order of $30 billion worth of gas. And it's enormous gas. And the Australian company Woodside was carrying out a very large scale study of Scott Reef. And it was mainly a maritime study of the species. Everything had to be documented that was there, because if you then interfere with it, you have to justify any kind of interference if you're going to try to get at that gas. And I was invited to go up and talk to the fishermen who were coming down to gather trepang. And this was a time of maximum fear of Islamic terrorism. And I think the executives at Woodside Petroleum had a fear that these fishermen could be Islamic terrorists coming down and would cause them no end of trouble. So I was given a ship. I've never been given a ship, but I was given a ship and a crew, and I sailed up there, and we laid anchor within Scott Reef, and I was set to work. There were 71 boats visiting to gather trepang, all of them except for a small contingent. Let's say 63 or 64 of the boats were from Roti, and a handful of them were from the island of Madura on Java, where they have traditionally come. To be able to come, they have to sail in. They can't use their motors. And anyway, so I spent roughly 2 weeks interviewing these fishermen, and I wrote one report. Well, I had to write several, but I wrote one report and explained that not all, but more than half of the fishermen who are coming down, none of them were Bajau. The fishermen who are coming down were Rotanese Christians, and therefore not Islamic terrorists. And the Muslims who are coming down were certainly not terrorists either. And I think my report, wrote me out of a job. There was no threat, and there was easily managed. We did one more study just to say just how much sea cucumber they were taking, what species, and we documented just what they were doing. So that is the extent of my work, but it's in terms of publications and unpublished reports, it amounts to a significant body of. And recently, last month, I was invited by the Indonesian Science Council to give what is called the AP Lapian lecture. And I had to give it online, Zoom, across the whole of Indonesia. So, I think we started the lecture. I thought, well, we had about, in the auditorium, I could see I was online here as I am now. I thought at the beginning we had maybe 40 people in the room, but by the time it really began, the ceremonies were over. My lecture, we had standing room only in the auditorium, and then watching the numbers increase by the hundreds. I don't know if I've ever given a lecture to so many people but it was for the Maritime Day, the 23rd of September. And it was all about, both about Austronesian migrations and also about the Bajau Laut. And then in the short time that was left over, it was very interesting because we had a leader of the Bajau Laut come in from Sulawesi, and he was delighted because I had made the argument that the Bajau were the first to discover Australia. And he said, we knew that all along. It was us. And we even gave the name, our name, Marege, is the name that we gave to Australia, and that's Bajau. So anyway, I've got friends among the Bajau.